Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. So today's video is going to be about the S63 engine reliability. Many of you guys don't know what that is. That's the BMW S63 engine, which was first used in the X5M and the X6M, and then followed over to the F10 M5 and still being used up till present by BMW in the newer M5 and M6s. Now this engine did move over to the TU version, but we are going to talk about the engine reliability and the issues this engine did have when new and still actually common moving forward. So we're not going to talk anymore. Let's get onto the video, and we're going to be talking about the BMW S63 engine reliability.
What? Goddamn, get it done, will ya? Woo. When I blow up now, everybody's so unusual with it. Shit. But said times in his rhymes, cause his memories. We running through New York, so you know.
Okay guys, so as you would have seen, this is regarding the BMW S63 engine, which you'll see right here, which is fitted in the M5, F10s, M6s, and still present following over to the newer M5 and M6s. BMW still use this engine because it produces good power, and it's also a V8, which is in line with the government regulations. Obviously, there is no other V10 apart from the E60 M5. Therefore, every engine produced by BMW, Mercedes is now all V8s. Now, when this engine first come out, it had a very, very bad rap. Now, that's purely because this is an N63 engine, which was first developed and moved into the performance car models. Now, bearing in mind, it was the S series, which was going into the M cars. These cars uses tight tolerances compared to the normal N series engine. Now, a lot of people had a lot of issues on the N63 engine, and nobody would have thought that this would have actually moved over to the S63, but it did indeed. And obviously, where it was making more power, which is talking 550 bhp in the F10 M5s, insane power for a twin turbocharged car, it started having all its issues. So the first one we're going to be talking about on the S63 engine, which likes to fail, is the Vanos solenoids. Now, the Vanos solenoids are a known issue. Obviously, all BMW use Vanos. Many of you guys already know that as variable valve timing on the engine. They're a common failure point, be it the S63, be it the N52, any of the N series engines, or any of the B series engines. The Vanos solenoids like to fail. Now, they're not cheap, and majority of the time, you know, they do function quite well, but obviously, like any part, they do wear down and do need replacing. Now, on an M5, it's going to be very, very costly, the same as it is on the E60 M5. Still to this day, for the Vanos solenoids, that's why they bring out a rebuild kit with the O-rings to replace them if you're losing Vanos pressure, and you take out those Vanos solenoids and rebuild the O-rings, which you can buy very, very cheaply, and redo the Vanos solenoids. They're not easy to get to because you've got to think how complicated the engine is, and that will be the same on the S63. But if they do fail, you end up with a lot of misfires. You'll feel your accelerator pedal feels very sluggish and the car's not making good power, because they are used to help aid the variable valve timing. So if they're not functioning correctly, what will be happening is your car will be boosting, but you won't be benefiting from the full power because the Vanos will not be able to be used. You end up with a check engine light, you might end up with a misfire at cylinder 1, cylinder 3, you can end up with a camshaft over retarded code on the S63. Very, very common. The Vanos solenoids will throw every light you can ever think of and will make your car feel very, very low down on power. The best way to figure out if they're actually failing or if they're not holding pressure is to get ISTA or a good diagnostics unit like an Autel Max system and check the oil pressure for the Vanos system itself, and to make sure the Vanos solenoids are working properly. You can run them checks on the E60 M5, and I don't see it being any different on the S63, considering BMW would have put that on that car to make sure you're able to check it. Being as highly electronical as it is, they're not going to make that car hard to diagnose, because it will make their life harder when it actually goes into the dealers under warranty. So if it's going to make their life easier, they're going to make your life easier as well. The next one I want to speak to you about, and this is a common issue. I know a lot of you are going to be angry about this. This was also common on the N63. This was common on the S85. This is common on the M55. This has been common on a lot of engines. It's the rod bearings on the S63. Yes, they're still plagued in issues, and yes, they still like to fail. Now, they did bring out the S63 TU. Maybe they revised that the same as they said they did on the S85 on the LCI models on the E60 M5. On the LCRs, they're meant to revise the rod bearings and they're meant to not wear as quickly. Whether that's true or not, it's just anybody's guess, but yes, they like to fail, and there has been known cases of these engines grenading thanks to rod bearing failure. It's a common issue, and if you haven't had them changed, coming up to 100k, I would strongly advise to have them changed. You got to think this is a twin turbocharged engine. It's using a lot of pressure inside the engine. It's a high performance car with turbochargers, therefore the rod bearings are going to suffer wear. And you've got to factor in anyone who owned this car previously. Think if they had an E60 M5, they went and bought the F10 M5 thinking, oh, it's going to be better this time. The way they thought they could thrash it from cold, they thought very wrongly. Now, I'm not saying we got to thrash it from cold, but you know, these business people who like to buy these when they're brand new with massive amounts of money, will just give it a good thrashing from cold. And this is why these cars end up needing their rod bearings, because they leave it the longest oil changes intervals as possible, because they follow the computer, because it's all under warranty. The way these people see it, if anything happens, they take it back to BMW, put a new engine in it, have everything replaced. So they will leave it and try and drag it out as long as possible and don't care for the car. But we as enthusiasts, we get hold of them, and obviously we have to pick up the downfall from these other people. Now, that's not to say this car's a bad car, because sorry, the E60 M5 needs rod bearings, so does the E92 M3s, and people still go out and do it. It depends on how skilled you are and how willing to want the car you are as well. If you really want that car and you want to make that car great, you will put all the money and effort into it. If it's a car you really want and it's your dream car, you will do the rod bearings. I know a lot of people are going to sit on this video saying, forget that, another rod bearing engine, another failure by BMW. No, it's not a failure by BMW. If you're willing to put the work in, then you're going to have a good, strong, reliable car, and it's if it's the car you want. Like for me, I told everybody I didn't want the E60 M5, but I got it and I put all the work in, because why? It's not the car's fault. I picked it, it was my problem. In the same time, I end up falling in love with the car, and now I don't think I'll change that car for anything, be it F10 M5 or even new M5 or M6s, it just wouldn't happen. But it is a common problem, and it's something you need to look out for on the F10 M5s and on that S63 engine, because it will grenade, and it's something I would strongly recommend to get changed out. And obviously it will be a big job on that car. It will be probably around 2 to 3 grand to have them done, but I strongly recommend to have them checked and have them changed out. Do not believe in oil analysis, because that all goes by how many people have changed the oil in its lifetime based on the ownership of the car. So if it's only been changed once in 15,000 miles, that's going to give a higher reading of particles in the oil. If the oil is changed out regularly, like 5 times a year, it's going to end up giving less particles in the oil, because the oil is changed out so regularly. So you've got to counter that as well. It all depends on the oil change. It does not mean your rod bearings are fine. Them oil analysis are all crap. Do not believe what they say. I don't believe it, and I don't take it as gospel. If I was to go and buy a car, the person said to me they had an oil analysis done at the lab, a Blackstone example, I would not trust it whatsoever. I still wouldn't believe it. They tried to say my E60 M5 had the same thing, and guess what? The rod bearings are on the way out. Do not believe them Blackstone lab tests, because it's all crap. The next one on these cars is excess oil consumption. Now, again, this stems from BMW's previous career. The E60 M5, the V10 was no different. Now we're moving on to the S63, and it's still drinking oil. M cars are known to drink oil, just the way they are. High performance engines with tight tolerances, they are going to burn oil. But obviously, what's normal and what's insane is a total different story. Now, BMW, they state that every 1,000 miles, the car will use a quarter of oil. Now, if you're using a quarter of oil, that's fine. BMW don't consider that excessive at all. If you went into BMW, they'd probably tell you you're coming in for stupidity, because that isn't excess. That's normal on an M car. Now, if you are getting it excessively, you could either have an oil leak, one of your turbos could be failing, your turbo seals could be failing. You've got to remember there's 2 turbos on the engine. The turbo seals on them, you will start seeing blue smoke. You could have a valve stem seal failure, which is very common on that engine, considering it follows over from the N63, but it's unlikely. It's not really heard of on the S63, it's more common on the N63. You could have a PCV sticking, which is a positive crankcase ventilation, which we'll go over in a minute regarding that. There could be many factors to why you're burning so much oil. As I said, every 1,000 miles to burn a quarter is perfectly normal, and that's what my E60 M5 does. I don't consider that at all excessive, and secondly, that's only at high RPM, it actually uses oil. you do have to check these things and try and find out where the leak's actually coming from. It's a big engine planted into that car, so you've got to try and be very technical minded and look carefully at where the oil's coming from. It could be your piston ring sticking, it could be valve stem seals, it could be even your car's on the way out, it could be many different things. It could be a pipe's all clogged up or sticking, and that could be causing your excess oil consumption. The next one on these is faulty turbos. Now, the turbos did like to give their up on these cars, and this was common on the also N63 engine. This also moved over to the start of the S63 before the S63 and they rectified the issue. The turbos, the wastegates would stick, the turbos would also end up not boosting properly, and it can also overboost and cause the car to actually destroy itself. This was common on the N63, very problematic problem, and it also moved over to the S63. Now, the problem with them is that the wastegates were sticking, causing it not to boost properly, causing it to underboost and causing it to have a boost leak, which in turn ended up destroying the actual engine itself, which also destroyed the Vanos system. And this is why, or if you go back to the start of the video, I mentioned the Vanos solenoids regarding this issue, because it ends up just putting too much pressure on the Vanos system where the turbo is not functioning properly. This is a common issue, and many of you would have come across having faulty turbos. I remember when these cars were new, N63 and S63, and there was a lot of cars going back to BMW, people leaving them outside BMW to get the problem fixed and rectified, people dumping their cars outside there because it was a known problem. They're also known to blow the seals on their turbo as well, very common, and it will end up with big issues and big problems. And the turbos, you've got to consider, are not cheap on that engine at whatsoever. And bearing in mind, I'm believing so that the N63 and S63 uses the same turbo setup. It's not a different turbo. They're both the same turbos. They're both twin turbo. It's only the engine that's tuned to be an S63 and have a performance engine over the N63. So be aware of that if your turbos start failing, to make sure you actually check them. You will know if they're failing. Again, with owning any of these cars, I do recommend to have ISTA. It's your best point of calls for if you're trying to find a problem on these cars, especially if you're owning an M car. You shouldn't be about ISTA. You should not be relying on the dealer to find your issues either. Now, the next one on these is the PCV. Now, this is a common problem on the S63 engine. This is the positive crankcase ventilation, which you'll probably see up here. These are known to clog up, and BMW have used this system for many years. It's always had an issue, and most of the BMs I get in here need changing. My M5 is no different from the rest. That needed them changed. They're little tiny valves which sit behind the back of the engine and on the two valve covers itself. There's actually 4 of them on the M5 on the V10, and they do need changing. They clog up, get built up, and what they can't do is return the oil back to the sump to be burnt off. It's all the gases from the crankcase, and what ends up happening is they clog up, cause too much excess pressure on the crankcase itself, where the oil can't return itself and it can't go past, and therefore it causes all your seals to actually rupture and pop, i.e. the valve stem seals, your crankcase ventilation, and you will also be using huge amounts of oil as well on that engine. Something you have to be careful with, and something you need to check on your S63 engine. The PCV is a known weak point. It's always been weak by BMW, and therefore it's going to be no different on the S63. Yes, it's a performance car. Yes, it uses oil quicker, so it shouldn't have that issue, but it's not something I would leave unattended and not checked. I would check that, especially if you have an excess oil consumption. Check your PCVs, because it's important. They could be the cause of why you're drinking too much oil. They could also be the cause of why your turbo seals are actually blowing, and also your valve stem seals. They back up, they get pressure in them, they put pressure inside the crankcase, pop every seal going. Therefore, I do recommend to check your PCV. The next one on the S63 is just like the N63, is the oil leaks. The oil leaks on that car are gonna be common. They're gonna be common just like any BMW. BMW, it wouldn't actually be a BMW if it didn't have oil leaks. The S63 is gonna suffer oil leaks, probably from the valve covers, the turbos, all the intercooler pipes. Everywhere you look, there'll probably be oil leaks, even from the sump. That's why when you actually get the rod bearings done, make sure you get a new sump gasket. The whole basically bottom end needs to be rebuilt. And I do believe in getting it completely rebuilt, so you've got all new gaskets as you go along. You can also find any other issues, anything else that's leaking, oil filter housing gaskets, anything it could be coming from, and repair it, because these cars are prone to oil leaks. You've got to think as well, they are running hot all the time. You've got turbochargers in there, doubling the heat under the engine bay, which is going to cause gaskets to rupture, shrink up, and destroy itself under the engine. Therefore, you're going to end up with more oil leaks. The next one on the S63, which is a common Weak point is the spark plugs on them. The spark plugs on them engines do like to fail, and this was prone on the N63 also. They get covered in oil from oil entering the combustion chamber from the PCV actually rupturing and people not knowing, and they get covered in oil. Now when that happens, you will need to change all 8 spark plugs. It is a common issue. Spark plugs are not expensive. I do recommend, if you're in the market to buy an S63, same as the N63, to go ahead and make sure to check your spark plugs if you are having misfire problems, rough running problems, or the car is not idling correctly, or it's not powering properly. Check your spark plugs and also check your ignition coils. Ignition coils are not too common to go on that, but the spark plugs are. They will get covered in oil, and it can become a big problem, especially later on down the line. If you don't replace them now, your car will leave you stranded because it won't be able to fire on a cylinder because it'll be too covered in oil. You never know as well, you could take the spark plugs out and they might not be firing correctly, or they could be dodgy, could be Chinese, or they could be covered in coolant. So I hope this video now clears up a lot of the issues on the S63 engine. I know a lot of you are going to say there is a lot of issues on this engine, and yes, there is indeed. As I said, it shares the same base as the N63, and if many of you guys know the N63 or are coming from the N63, you'll know this engine was plagued in issues, and a lot of them did follow over to the S63. BMW have to act better because this is going into the M cars, which are more expensive. It's the same as if you was going to buy a Rolls Royce and it had the same engine as BMW. You're not going to expect the same problems from BMW to be covered over to Rolls Royce, where it's more expensive. And that's the same for coming from the normal N63, which is in their normal cars, 550i's, over to their M cars, you know. But a lot of the issues are still present there, and a lot of them do follow over to the S63. As I said to you, if you don't have ISTA, my best point of call is to get yourself the ISTA program. Get the ISTA program. You'll thank me later for owning that program. You will not have to rely on the dealers, and you will not have to rely on them actually fixing your car, because a lot of the time it's people coming problems, take them to the dealer can't find the issue, and therefore you're left stranded with a car and not knowing how to fix it. Then people keep driving it and it ends up detonating the whole engine. That's why a lot of the time these engines end up blowing up, because people can't diagnose them quick enough because they don't have the right software or skills to actually diagnose these cars. I do recommend go and get yourself ISTA, and you'll be perfectly fine owning these perfect M cars. Like I said, they do have their issues, but it's down to you. If you're willing to put the time in, the devotion in, and you're enthusiastic about it, go and own this car. I don't want to hear this car's unreliable, because no car, no BMW is unreliable. It's all about you. If you're going to devote your time, if you really want that car bad enough, you will put the time in, you'll find the money, and you will do whatever's needed to look after that car and to maintain that car. There is no BMW that is unreliable. Every BMW to me is reliable. It's only reliable in the right, capable hands, and it depends on how enthusiastic you are about it. You can't just buy the car because your friends got it and you want to own it. It's if you want it. You have to want it yourself. You have to want to work on it yourself. If you don't get any BMW, regardless of M5, M6, M4, M2, M1, it's not for you. So I hope this video is going to help a lot of you guys in the market for the M5, M6, X5M or X6M. There is a lot of issues on this engine you need to look out for, but I hope this video is going to actually help you along the way of buying your new M5 or M6. Thank you very much for watching this. BMW Dr. Dean here, and goodbye.